Hey, you're back. Welcome to Season 3 of The People We Meet. I'm Ty Bruner. I'll be your host. I'm glad you're here, and let's get on with it. Well, hi, and welcome back to Season 3 of The People We Meet. I took the summer off to do some summer stuff and a bunch of construction. And then Spokane almost burned to the ground. But during that time, I had an opportunity to look around a bit. Probably too much. Too much time listening to the news. Too much time reading the outrage on social media. But still some time to think about things that I felt matter. Like who we look up to these days. Now, when I was a kid, heroes weren't hard to find. They were everywhere. Some of them wore capes like the Man of Steel, and some wore cowboy hats like the Lone Ranger. Some stepped into a batter's box carrying a Louisville Slugger, and others climbed into rockets pointed at the moon. Some existed only in comic books, and somehow still felt more real than a lot of the people we knew. And if you grew up in my generation, I know exactly who you had up on your wall. And no, I'm not talking about Farrah Fawcett. I know who was on your lunchbox. I know who was tucked inside your baseball card collection. And I know who you watched on television or rewound on a VHS tape until it became a scratchy, worn-out mess. You watched them and thought, man, I want to be like that guy. Me? I wanted to be the $6 million man. Gentlemen, we can rebuild him. Better, stronger, faster. And making all kinds of fucking racket until my mom yelled at me to stop knocking shit over. Maybe you grew up before me. Maybe your heroes were Hank Aaron or Sergeant Fury or the Unknown Soldier or the Mercury 7. Maybe you grew up after me. Michael Jordan, Katniss Everdeen. You know who I'm talking about. And maybe you had a stack of comic books on your nightstand. The covers were bent. The pages were dog-eared because you'd read them 100 times. Spider-Man, Batman. We didn't just read those stories. We climbed onto the couch, tied a bath towel around our necks, and jumped off pretending we could fly. And that towel around your neck wasn't fooling anybody but you. And somehow, that was enough. It was enough to believe, if only for a few minutes, that we could be brave. Maybe your bedroom wall had posters. Babe Ruth calling his shot before he blasted one over the center field wall. Muhammad Ali standing over Sonny Liston, fearless, defiant, and victorious. And Evel Knievel somehow convincing us that motorcycles could really fly if the rider was crazy enough. And some of us filled shoeboxes with baseball cards that we flipped through until the corners were rounded over, and we traded them on the playground like they were treasure. Every card told a story. Every player represented something we admired. Determination, excellence, grit, and courage. And then there were the astronauts. There was a time when little boys and girls taped pictures of astronauts to their bedroom walls because they represented the very best of us. Curiosity, courage, and service. The willingness to strap yourself to the top of a controlled explosion in the name of exploration. To go to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. Our heroes mattered, because heroes have always been more than entertainment. And the funny thing about heroes is that nobody chooses them for you. You do that. They become our measuring stick. We borrow pieces of them, the way they carry themselves, the way they treat people, the way they respond when things get hard. And whether we realize it or not, the people we admire slowly shape the people that we become. I don't think we imitate our heroes all at once. I think it happens a little at a time. A phrase we remember or a decision we make, or a line we refuse to cross. We spend our lives becoming, in small ways, a little more like the people we've chosen to admire. And that's what I've been thinking about lately. Not because heroes are harder to find, but because I'm not sure we're always looking in the right places. Today, if you ask a young man who he admires, you might hear the name of an athlete, an actor, a musician, or increasingly, someone whose entire life has lived in front of a camera. Someone with millions of followers. Someone with a mansion, a luxury watch, or a fleet of exotic cars. Someone whose greatest talent isn't courage. It's attention and clicks. And we call them influencers. Now, before we go any further, let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with success. There's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with driving a kick-ass car or wearing a sweet watch if you've earned it. That's not what this episode's about. This episode is about something much older than algorithms, much older than social media. It's about admiration, because the people we admire eventually become the people we imitate. So today, I want to ask you one simple question, one I don't think we're nearly asking enough anymore. Who deserves to be your hero? And that question's been rattling around in my head for a while now, because somewhere along the way, I think we stopped asking it. Or maybe we just stopped asking it carefully, purposefully, and meaningfully. I've watched young men searching for examples of what it means to be successful, what it means to be respected, what it means to be a man. And some of the answers they found, honestly, they worry me. Not because they're rich, not because they're famous, and not because they've built successful businesses. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. What worries me is when success becomes the only measuring stick, when followers become more important than character, and when attention becomes more valuable than integrity. And lately, it's not just those influencers flaunting their cars and watches and cribs that are leading the charge. It's some of our own so-called leaders, some that occupy the highest offices in the land that are sending the message that intolerance is cool, that cruelty is strength, and that humiliation somehow became entertainment. We live in a fucked up time, where those who have little to offer are somehow encouraging others to be just like them, where those who know the least are shouting their bullshit the loudest, where you can jump online and say whatever you think will get you the most clicks, no matter how outrageous, caustic, disrespectful, or just plain fucking stupid it is. I'm tired of watching empty vessels of people with nothing of value to say and nothing of substance to lose try to convince young men that they have it all figured out. And here's the part that breaks my heart. They don't just get clicks, they get disciples. Because I've come to believe something. Character isn't revealed when there's something to gain. Character is revealed when there's something to lose. And history is full of moments like that. Moments when there wasn't an iPhone to capture the moment, no followers, just a decision. So with that, I'm going to tell you a story. January 1945. The war in Europe was coming to an end, and the Germans knew they were losing. But inside one prisoner of war camp, one final act of cruelty was about to unfold. Now, the camp held more than 1,000 American prisoners, cold, hungry, and exhausted. And among them was a master sergeant from Tennessee named Roddy Edmonds. Now, Roddy Edmonds wasn't just another prisoner. As a senior American enlisted man in the camp, more than 1,000 other prisoners looked to him for leadership. His name never appeared on my lunchbox, but maybe it should have. Like everyone else in that camp, he'd already endured more than most of us can imagine. And then came the order. The German commandant assembled the American prisoners and announced that all Jewish prisoners were to assemble separately the next morning. Now, these weren't civilians. These were American soldiers. The men standing beside you, the men you've marched with, frozen with, starved with. And now the Germans wanted them separated from everyone else. And by then, there were few illusions left about what separating Jewish prisoners meant. And Edmonds understood it too. He also understood something else. If those men stepped forward, they would never come home. So the next morning, when the prisoners were ordered to assemble, every American prisoner stepped forward. Every one of them. The German commandant was fucking pissed, and he demanded to know which ones were Jewish. And Roddy Edmonds looked him in the eye and said, "We're all Jews." The commandant threatened to shoot him, right there, on the spot, and Edmonds didn't flinch. Instead, he reminded the German officer that under the Geneva Convention, he was only required to give his name, rank, and serial number. And then he said something else. "If you shoot me, you have to shoot all of us. And after the war, you'll be tried for war crimes." The commandant looked across the formation of more than 1,000 American prisoners. He lowered his pistol, turned around, he walked away. More than 200 American soldiers lived because one man decided that there were some things more important than staying alive. Roddy Edmonds had something to lose. And if you like that, I got another one. Now, a few years ago, I watched the movie Hidden Figures. And if you haven't seen it, go watch it after you finish this podcast, because it's pretty good. Now, there's a scene in that movie that's one of the most powerful pieces of cinema I have ever watched. In fact, fun story, after I had already seen it a few times, I watched a guy next to me on a flight to California watching it. And when he got to the part that I'm talking about, he reacted just like I thought he would. He cried. And he tried to make sure no one saw him, but I did. And I'm glad I did. But don't tell him that. During the race to get to the moon, NASA had computers, but they weren't Apples and IBMs. They were people that did the math before we had machines to do the math. And there was a group of them that were African American women, and one of them was Katherine Johnson. And in that scene, Katherine Johnson has finally had enough, and she explodes. She's tired of running halfway across the NASA campus just to use the restroom, tired of drinking from a separate coffee pot that says colored on it. I mean, think about it. The absurdity that a brilliant mathematician working at NASA isn't good enough to drink from the same coffee pot as everyone else. She's tired of being reminded every single day that she doesn't belong. And Kevin Costner's character listens, and he grabs a crowbar, and he tears down the sign over the restroom, and he says, "There, go wherever you damn well please. Here at NASA, we all pee the same color." And it's one of the most satisfying scenes I've ever watched. Now, here's the interesting part. That scene didn't actually happen that way. Hollywood compressed a lot of history into one unforgettable moment. But the discrimination, that was real. The separate bathrooms, those were real. And the separate coffee pots were real. And so were the people who finally looked around and said, "This is bullshit." Not because they were trying to become heroes or because they thought history would remember them. Because they recognized something simple. Talent doesn't care what color your skin is. And brilliance doesn't care whether you're a man or a woman. And dignity isn't something another human being gets to hand to you. And not only did they recognize it, they did something about it. Those boys not only changed the culture at NASA, they changed history. And it wasn't one dramatic act. It was dozens, maybe hundreds. A supervisor who decided Katherine Johnson belonged in the meeting instead of outside the door. An engineer who stopped talking over her long enough to hear what she had to say. A manager who put her name on the report instead of pretending some guy had done the math. And someone who asked her to check the calculations before a man climbed into a rocket. Her calculations were so good that when the computers arrived, John Glenn famously asked for Katherine herself to verify the computer's numbers before his orbital flight. Not one of those moments made the evening news. And none of them earned a standing ovation. Most of them probably weren't even remembered by the people who made them. But together, they changed NASA. They changed who got to contribute and who got to dream. And because they did, America got better. And I'm going to go one step further. If those orbit trajectories or re-entry calculations weren't correct, we would have been down one of the Mercury 7. America would have mourned the loss of a hero, and we probably wouldn't have made it to the moon in time to beat those dirty commies. Those men could have protected the system, but instead, they opened the door. Sometimes courage isn't standing in front of a Nazi officer. Sometimes it's looking at the culture you've inherited and having the backbone to say, "Nope, this shit doesn't work anymore." Now, speaking of which, let's talk about the loudest voices in the room. The manosphere. And if you've never heard the term before, don't worry. Most people haven't. They've heard the names. They've seen the clips. But they may not realize they're looking at an entire ecosystem. YouTube channels, podcasts, and TikTok clips. A whole industry built around telling young men what it supposedly means to become a man. And here's where I want to be fair. Not everything they say is wrong. Some of it's actually pretty useful. Get off the couch, go to the gym, take responsibility for your life, build a career, learn discipline, become financially stable. Those are good things. Hell, they're things I'd tell my own son. But then the language changes. And when the language changes, the meaning changes. Self-improvement becomes self-marketing. Fitness becomes looks maxing. Talking to women becomes game. Dating becomes strategy. Marriage becomes a trap. Women become high value or low value, and men become alpha or beta. People are ranked, relationships are transactions, and human beings become products. Then comes the red pill. And the phrase comes from the Matrix, where taking the red pill means waking up and seeing reality as it really is. In the manosphere, being red-pilled means you've supposedly woken up to the truth about women, dating, power, and society. And some of what they point to sounds reasonable at first. Yes, attraction matters. Yes, confidence matters, and stability matters, and status can influence how people see you. And yeah, men and women sometimes move through the world differently. Fine. None of that is shocking. But then take a piece of truth and twist it until it becomes something uglier. Instead of saying, some people are attracted to confidence and stability, it becomes, women only care about money and status. Instead of saying, work on yourself, it becomes, turn yourself into a product so women will validate you. And instead of saying, choose partners wisely, it becomes, women are always looking to trade up. And that's where the word hypergamy comes in. Hypergamy is a real sociological term, and traditionally it means marrying up in social class or status. But in the manosphere, it usually gets flattened into something much darker. The idea that women are biologically wired to chase the highest status man available, that if someone richer, stronger, better looking, or more powerful comes along, she'll leave. That loyalty is temporary, and that love is mostly leverage. That relationships are just marketplaces where everyone is trying to get the best deal. And of course, people care about stability, and they notice success. And of course, nobody wants to build a life with somebody who is reckless, lazy, unreliable, or emotionally 12 years old. But reducing women to that, reducing love to that, commitment to a transaction, that's not wisdom. That's fear dressed up in a philosophy costume. That's insecurity with a microphone, and it's shallow as hell, because real life is so much bigger than that. People build marriages through sickness, grief, bills, kids, loss, aging parents, bad days, boring Tuesdays, and the 1,000 ordinary moments that nobody posts online. The best relationships aren't won, they're built. And you don't build them by treating the other person like an opponent. You build them by becoming someone trustworthy. And that's the part where this whole ecosystem keeps missing. It talks about value constantly. High value man, high value woman, market value, sexual value, status value, but almost never moral value, almost never kindness, almost never humility, almost never service. And I have yet to hear them talk about character. And that's why I keep coming back to heroes, because the people we admire eventually become the people we imitate. And if your heroes are men who treat women like prizes, don't be surprised when you start seeing women as objects. And if your heroes are men who reduce every relationship to leverage, don't be surprised when you become incapable of trust. And if your heroes are men who confuse cruelty with confidence, don't be surprised when decency starts to look weak. Now, I'm no philosophicator, but from my way of thinking, if the only thing that you bring to the table is your material shit, don't be surprised when the women you attract are perfectly happy to take it from you. And then there's the absurdity of the whole thing. Looks maxing, status maxing, dominance, ranking, frame, game. It's supposed to be about attracting women, but half the time it starts to look like a bunch of dudes performing masculinity for other dudes. Who's impressed by the Rolex? Mostly other Rolex guys. Who's impressed by the car? Mostly other car guys. Who keeps score of whether you're alpha or not? Mostly other guys trapped in the same dumb competition. And at some point you have to ask, are you trying to build a life, or are you trying to win a leaderboard nobody with actual depth gives a shit about? Now, I've been going to the gym for years, and it's not because I want some guy online to rank me. I go because I want to stay healthy. I want to play racquetball. And because someday I'm hoping to be able to get my old ass up and go outside and play with my grandkids. My family may need me. A stranger may need me, because strength should have a purpose beyond being admired. And that's the difference. Purpose versus performance. Character versus branding. And that's what this all really comes down to. The manosphere didn't invent insecurity. It just monetized it. It found young men who were lonely, frustrated, confused, angry, or unsure where they belonged. And it handed them a script. You're not the problem. Women are. Feminism is. Society is. The system is. And there's even a guy out there that will encourage you to hit yourself in the face with a hammer to excite your cheekbones. I mean, what the fuck? That's not mentorship. That's not wisdom. That's just marketing. I watched a documentary not long ago where one influencer stood in the street chanting, "Fuck the Jews." And later, when he was asked about it, he admitted he didn't even believe what he was saying. He said it because it got attention. Now compare that to Roddy Edmonds. One man stood in front of a Nazi officer and declared, "We're all Jews," knowing it could cost him his life. And the other shouted hatred he didn't even believe because he thought it would earn him more clicks. And here's why this matters. Young men are watching. They're choosing examples. They're choosing voices. They're choosing heroes. But there is another way, and there always has been. There are men worth admiring. Men who don't need to dominate every room. Men who don't need to rank women to feel powerful. And men who know that strength is not measured by how many people fear you. It's measured by who you can trust when things fall apart. So yeah, go to the gym. Make money, build a life, become competent, become capable, be disciplined. But don't confuse any of that with character. Because when your moment comes, and it will come, the world won't care what watch you're wearing, and it won't care how many followers you had. It will ask one question: what do you have to offer? Now, after I watched that documentary, I started thinking about something else. Not the influencer, not the clicks. I started thinking about my own life and about the Marines I served with, and I realized something. It never would have occurred to me to stand in front of anybody and start yelling, "Fuck the Jews." First, because it's just plain fucked up. And second, because had I experienced some sort of bona fide brain fart and actually done it, I would have found myself punched square in the face, and rightly so. And then I started thinking about one of the greatest lessons I ever learned as a young Marine. Now, I can't speak for every drill instructor. I can only tell you what mine said, and he didn't mince words, so I won't either. He looked at us and said, "I don't give a flying fuck where any of you came from or what your attitude is about race, religion, color, or creed. We're going to get something straight right here and now. There is no black. There is no white. There is no yellow, tan, or brown. In the United States Marine Corps, we are all just different shades of green. And here's why. When you're out there facing the enemy and one of you gets shot, we all bleed fucking red." And that wasn't just a speech. It came true. In my little band of Scarface brothers, we came from everywhere. Every shade of green you could imagine. I got buddies scattered all over this country. There's a country boy, the whitest guy I know, who owns the only gas station in Tulare, South Dakota, and an African-American brother from Bowling Green, Kentucky, and a surfer brainiac engineer who was undoubtedly stoned about as often as he's sober because he's so damn smart that weed probably is the only thing that makes the rest of us tolerable, and our token ginger named Red. Sorry, brother, we could have done better with that one. A corporate finance genius from Chicago, and one exceptionally loud New Jerseyan who just so happens to be my best friend. And then there were the Mexicans. One day they vandalized the safety poster in the shop. And the poster said, "Safety comes in cans. I can, you can." And it even had pictures of little cans. So they drew a third one, Mexican. I don't care who you are, that's funny. But I digress. Here's the point. I can't speak for the entire Marine Corps. I can only speak for my Marines. We didn't give a shit where you came from. We had bigger fish to fry. We were too busy making sure none of us became a smoking hole in the ground. We were too busy making sure our brothers didn't become a smoking hole in the ground. Too busy doing things that actually mattered. Because when your life depends on the person standing next to you, you stop seeing categories and you start seeing character. And that's what bothers me so much about all of this noise. It teaches young men to look for differences instead of common ground, to rank people instead of know them, to dominate instead of serve, to collect status instead of build character. The men who shaped me taught exactly the opposite. And then, years later, I met another young man. And I never knew him personally, but he reminded me that my drill instructor was right all along. And I've been called a hero more times than I deserve. Between the fire service and the Marine Corps, people say, "Hey, thank you for your service," or "You're a hero." And while I appreciate the kindness, I've never really felt comfortable wearing that title. And maybe it's because although I've had the opportunity to do some pretty cool shit, in every one of those instances, it was because it was what I was trained to do. I did what was expected of me. And sometimes I even fucked that up. And maybe it's because I've stood on the shoulders of giants and known many that did it better than I ever could. Or maybe, every once in a while, someone comes along and resets that definition of courage. And for me, that person is Riley Howell. Now, I'm going to warn you about something. I've tried over and over to get through this next part without losing my shit. And I can't do it. And I've accepted that. So fuck it. Here's me blubbering on my own show. Riley was 21 years old, an environmental studies major at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. He loved the outdoors, and he loved hiking, and he ran cross country, and he was an ROTC cadet, and he talked about becoming a firefighter someday. And he absolutely loved Star Wars, and not the casual kind of fan, the real deal, the kind who knew the characters and the stories and the lore. But if you ask people who knew Riley, they don't start with Star Wars. They talk about the kind of young man he already was. Kind, and funny, and thoughtful. The guy who naturally looked after other people. The guy who stepped in when someone needed help. And long before anyone called him a hero, he was already becoming one. April 30th, 2019. The last day of classes before finals. Students were gathered in anthropology classroom giving presentations. Just another ordinary afternoon. Until it wasn't. A gunman walked into the room and opened fire. Chaos erupted. Students ran. Some dove under desks. Some crawled towards the exits. And Riley Howell ran at the shooter. And one classmate remembered Riley charging the gunman while yelling for everyone else to get out. And he tackled him. And the struggle disrupted the attack. And police later said Riley's actions absolutely saved lives. Even the gunman who lived later admitted that Riley tackling him caused him to stop firing. He was a 21-year-old kid who showed up to school thinking he was just going to give an anthropology presentation. And instead, he chose everyone else's life over his own. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't wearing body armor, and he wasn't carrying a weapon. Riley was shot. He was shot multiple times. And he died that afternoon. And another student, Elias Parker, was also killed. 4 more students were wounded. We'll never know exactly how many lives Riley saved. Maybe it was 5. Maybe it was 15. Maybe it was more. But what we do know is that the attack stopped because one young man decided to move toward the danger instead of away from it. And when I first heard Riley's story, I cried. Not because I'm especially emotional, and not because I knew him. I cried because I couldn't stop asking myself one question. What kind of young man sees everyone else running in one direction and decides to run the other? And the only answer I've ever been able to come up with is this. That decision didn't happen in 1 second. It took 21 years. 21 years of parents, teachers, friends, coaches. 21 years of becoming the kind of man who would make that decision without stopping to calculate the cost. And after Riley died, the honors came. His university awarded him his degree in memoriam. His ROTC battalion honored him. And the Congressional Medal of Honor Society recognized him with its Citizen Honors Award. And all of those honors were deserved. But the tribute that gets me every single time has nothing to do with medals, because Riley loved Star Wars. And after his death, fans wrote to Lucasfilm and told them about a young man who had given his life to save his classmates. And Lucasfilm listened, not because Riley played a hero, but because he lived like one. And today, somewhere in the Star Wars universe, there is a Jedi Master and historian named Lee Howell. Now, here's what I love about that. They didn't make Riley a legendary lightsaber duelist, and they didn't make him the greatest pilot in the galaxy. They made him a historian, the keeper of some of the oldest Jedi history and knowledge ever written. The man entrusted with preserving the stories and the wisdom and the ideals of those who came before so future generations wouldn't forget them. And I can't think of a more fitting tribute, because that's exactly what heroes do. They leave behind stories worth telling. And that's exactly what Riley Howell did. A 21-year-old college student became the kind of man whose story deserves to be passed from one generation to the next. Long after the news cameras packed up and long after the headlines disappeared, somewhere in a galaxy far, far away, Riley Howell is still guarding the stories of heroes. And here, so are we. Mr. and Mrs. Howell, I don't know if this episode will ever find its way to you. But if it does, I host my show in what I call the Watchtower. And on my wall is a poster of your son as the warrior that he is. And I want you to know that your son is my hero. And if I ever had a son, I'd want him to grow up to be just like Riley. Now, earlier on, I bitched that my little show may be lucky to get a few hundred downloads per episode. But here's my real take on that. I'd rather get 200 downloads and change one life than get 200,000 clicks for teaching that cruelty is confidence, because heroes still exist. Sometimes you just have to look a little harder for them. And Riley, thanks for being that for me. Well, that'll about do it for this episode of The People We Meet. But before we go, I just want to say thank you. Seriously, this show only exists because you keep showing up, listening, sharing, and being a part of it. And I don't take that lightly. And to my family for humoring my foolish endeavors. And if something in this episode stuck with you, pass it along. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you've got a story, your story or someone else's that deserves a voice, I want to hear from you. Head over to the People We Meet podcast and reach out. You can also find the show on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Podbean. Give it a follow. Stay connected and help this thing grow. Thanks again for listening. And as always, be good to each other.